Hello again. This is Saturday devotional from our week where we discuss the cross. This one's entitled Come Down from the Cross, and it's on Mark 15:25-32. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two bandits or thieves, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Ha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. In the face of this kind of cruelty, this kind of public humiliation during the crucifixion, this is a man dying. And even the people on the other crosses around him are yelling and making fun of him and throwing things at him and just being horrible, mocking him. Is it any wonder that the disciples abandoned Jesus? I mean, really? Is it any wonder? I mean, of course they did. But isn't there a part of us that wishes that Jesus would come down off the cross and show all these people, who's really in charge? I mean, our love of, superhero movies and tough guys, isn't that what part of us really wants to see? And that was part of the temptations that Jesus had early on, one of them was earthly power, just to be able to come down off that cross and show them who's in charge. But he doesn't. He remains on the cross, dying, mocked, spit upon. I mean, what kind of God do we worship? Who would do that? Well, we worship the God who stays on the cross regardless of the cost to save the world. We worship a God who refuses to leave anyone behind, doesn't leave any place, any circumstance forsaken. Nothing is beyond God's redemption. We worship a God whose power is made perfect in weakness. We worship a God who forgives the ones who taunt, the ones who torture. We worship a God whose vulnerable love takes on the sin of everyone around him, from the highest, from Pilate, from Caiaphas, all the way down to the denying disciples, even down to the women who refuse to leave, because we haven't mentioned them yet. They're the only ones who stay, the women. Now, part of this is that they're not seen as a threat by the Roman authorities or the Jewish authorities. Women were never seen as a threat. Women were property. They were add-ons. They were annoyances. They were, just something to be cast aside. So they weren't considered dangerous or threatening. So having women around, it also gave them the opportunity to be able to stay till the end, because no one drove them away. No one was frightened of them. No one saw them as anything other than a mess. I mean, just, something to be dealt with, whatever. Who cares? It's just a bunch of women. Let them cry. But it's important to remember that they were the only ones who stayed. In part because of that, because of their lowly status, they could do that. But we also worship a God who stayed on the cross until the work was finished, who remained on the cross with us no matter how painful the circumstances, the one who refused to come down so that everyone would be lifted up and that nothing could separate us from the love of God. It would have been so easy for Jesus to do that, to come down from the cross, and take care of business, so to speak. But that was the easy way. That wasn't going to redeem the world. That wasn't going to help anybody. That was never going to fix the problem. You had to be willing to stay till the bitter end, which he did. We worship a God who refuses to leave anything or anyone behind. Nothing is irredeemable. No one is forsaken. No one. That's a powerful message. The strength that comes through weakness. Worshiping a God who forgives even those who tortured him. That's no small thing. That's no small act. And so something to think about and remember is that there's nowhere we can go, no depth to which we can sink, that God has not already been there. There's no hole so deep, so dark that God can't reach us, that God hasn't already been there and kind of scooped us up from underneath. There is nowhere we can go to escape from God and God's love. Nothing can or will separate us from the love of God. Now, we ourselves can deny it. We ourselves can try to run from it. But there is nothing that can separate us. Not anything in this world. And that's what we have to cling to and what we have to remember. We would love Jesus to come down from the cross so that we can be strong and powerful. But that's never been where our strength and our power comes from. From overturning the tables, from throwing everybody out, from being the biggest and the baddest. That's not where our power comes from. It comes from being willing to sacrifice for one another. That's when we're at our strongest, is when we understand the depths to which God had to go for us. So some questions. What is it that enables people to be so cruel to those who are already suffering? That's something that happens all the time. You see it all the time. I mean, when you think about the way historically public executions have been done, I mean, they were like a party. People were having a good time and buying and selling things and getting snacks so that they could watch this. What is it about people that allows them to be so cruel to someone who's already suffering? How do religious people justify their violent behavior? You know, think back to things like lynchings. How do we justify that? And what could we do to prevent this perversion of the faith? I mean, and it doesn't have to be huge things like the Crusades. I mean, we do things like this all the time. How do we justify our violent behavior? And then number 3, do you ever want God to orchestrate that superhero type ending? Save the day. How do we remain faithful in the midst of painful circumstances that don't have an obvious victorious ending? Because it doesn't always. So how do we keep the faith in light of painful circumstances that don't always end with a superhero coming in and saving the day? Because very often they don't. And so how do we keep our faith against overwhelming odds and against the constant crash of life against us and all the things that happen? And I think at a time such as this, that's an important idea to wrestle with and to think about, because I think a lot of us are having our faith tested right now in trying to figure out what to do next and how to engage with the world when you can't go out in it. So those are just some things to think about. I hope you've enjoyed this. And next week we'll have a very different topic. We'll be talking about the coins. So we'll have some very different things to talk about. And I hope you'll continue to follow along. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.